Yeah, but when I was reading your biography there, I noticed that this was worded in such a way as you seem to be pretty definite that your theories and your research has led you to the correct conclusion. So I take it you're pretty strongly convinced.
Well, certainly, just like everybody is about everybody's ideas. Egyptologists are very strongly convinced about their ideas, and everybody else is. So certainly, strong conviction with quite a bit of justification.
And that's what I think we're going to fixing to get into here for a second. Now, your site is called thepump.org. So, and I believe when I've talked to you before, it's called the pump because you believe that they had a water pump device that they were using to lift these massive stones up higher and higher as they went.
That is correct. We believe that the Great Pyramid was built not as a tomb, but to be infrastructure for the civilization that built it. And that infrastructure served the purpose of being a machine. And that machine, the Great Pyramid in its totality, was a water pump.
Okay. Now, is this water pump the only purpose you think the pyramid was acting as, or do you think it served, like, say, multiple purposes?
I believe that the machine itself was its only purpose was to pump water. The uses for the pumped water was certainly varied. Just like a radial arm saw, its only purpose is to turn a blade, but you can make a lot of things with a radial arm saw. So the odd passages and chambers, the multiple chambers, and odd configuration wasn't for to house a tomb for some dead corpse or a pharaoh or whatever, but all of those passages and chambers served at one time to be a machine, which was to pump water.
Well, we know certainly that even today there's water standing at the lower levels of the pyramid, as I've been given to understand from some of the articles that I read. Certainly in the underground-like levels underneath the pyramid, there's water standing, which would certainly seem to support what you're saying. What is your exact theory on how they used water to build it, however?
Okay. The way the Great Pyramid was assembled is described in detail in my book, Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. And imagine that there's no pyramid and that they want to build one. So they put on the casing stones, which are the very precise stones on the outside. They put just the first level of casing stones and set those in place. And those are cemented together. The ones that still are at the Giza Plateau are still cemented together and watertight. Well, that created a square area that was filled with water. And our research indicates that there were water locks, like the Erie Canal or the Panama Canal. These water locks came from the Nile River all the way up to the building site. And stones on barges were brought up those water locks and, in fact, into that pond created by those casing stones and removed from the barges actually into the pond. And when that pond was filled with stones, then the first level of the Great Pyramid was completed. And then they continued that process, added the second layer of casing stones, which more water was brought in and filled that pond. And then another water lock was created so that stones on barges could go from the Nile all the way up to that second pond, and they would fill that pond in with the interior stones. And that's the systematic procedure that was used to move the massive amounts of heavy stones and set them in place.
Whoa. Now, see, that sounds very methodical to me. But one of the questions that came up in the chat room while you were describing this was Paul was asking if the main pyramid was for a water pump, what about the other two nearby pyramids?
Okay. Based on our research, I don't believe that either of the other large pyramids on the Giza Plateau were water pumps. So I believe that just the Great Pyramid was a water pump. I see originally that the Giza Plateau was more of a industrial park or a science center than a necropolis, a place for tombs. Originally, that's what I believe it was for. So no, the other pyramids are built differently and do not serve the purpose of pumping water.
Yeah. Now, it's been pretty well debunked, I think, over time, and it's pretty well known fact that they're not, they were never meant to be tombs. In fact, they've never even found a body in any of them, and the claim about the kings being buried there, it's pretty common knowledge that the kings are all buried over in the, I want to say it's called the King's Valley, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Valley of the Kings, yes.
Yeah, Valley of the Kings. So, why would you want to bury so many kings over here and then only, none over here, and then say the place is for a tomb? Kind of defies all logic. So, what you're describing to me sounds like a much more practical, useful purpose, which could probably be reinstituted to this day. But one of the questions I think would come up with that is, how did they get around the situation when the Nile River was down and water was not as plentiful?
Okay, the source water for the Giza Plateau was not directly from the Nile River. It was from, there's scholarly debate, certainly, but more than likely it was from the ancient Lake Maurice, which is on the same side of the river as the Great Pyramid. That ancient lake is still there. It's much smaller now than in distant antiquity. And Herodotus, the 5th century BC historian, talked about canals from Lake Maurice to the Giza Plateau. He talked about the Great Pyramid being surrounded by water, and the Great Pyramid was like a lake. There was a wall around the Great Pyramid that existed up until the mid-1800s, and Egyptologists said that wall was to keep the unwashed masses away from the Great Pyramid. But we feel that there was a lake, that wall impounded water, and the Great Pyramid sat in that pond, if you will. And also inside the Great Pyramid, the early Egyptologist Flanders Petrie, in his early work, found what he called Nile earth inside the Great Pyramid, which was sediment, if you will. So there's a lot of evidence indicating water on the Giza Plateau, especially in distant antiquity. So that would be the source of water.
Wow. Now, I know that I think it was Robert Schoch and John Gray has also been out to the plateau, and they discovered about the water erosion around the Sphinx. But I think that they were saying at the time that the Sphinx was built, they theorized it was a much more tropical time. Mm-hmm. Are you thinking that the pyramid could have possibly been built during this time?
When the Great Pyramid was built is certainly up to scholarly debate more and more. The civilization that we call the ancient Egyptians don't seem to have the technology to build even the components of the Great Pyramid. The precision of the stone cutting is phenomenal. In fact, it has never been demonstrated that the people that know about ancient Egypt, Egyptologists, they've never made a casing stone. Never drug a heavy stone around the corner of a spiral lamp. And the heaviest stones, 70-ton stones, the entire science since its inception till today has never moved a 70-ton payload 1 inch. So that's kind of interesting pieces of evidence that books about Egyptology don't really talk about. That they can sure tell a story, but they can't demonstrate what they're saying. So that's a problem with Egyptology.
Right. Which they got more than one problem, I think, with it. There's a lot of things in the past that are, well, open for debate, I would say. Now, Paul was asking, have they found any watermarks in the pyramids?
Well, certainly, like you mentioned a minute ago, there's a lot of water erosion on the Sphinx and also the Sphinx enclosure. And Robert Schoch, who I've met and we've talked, he theorizes that water came from possibly pre-ice age, if you will, when the Giza Plateau area was more of a savanna and more tropical, so there was more water. And that would put the construction of the Sphinx, anyway, farther back in time. There's some erosion on the Great Pyramid on the some of the remaining casing stones, especially those in the back, if you will. The ones in front have been repaired for tourist photo ops and that type of thing, but on the south side, if you will, those casing stones, when I was there, showed a lot of erosion from that pond that I talked about, the wall around the Great Pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that's some very evident erosion. But inside the Great Pyramid, there's not really erosion, because we believe that the water was quite filtered and fairly clean when it went in, and also the way the water moved was quite gentle inside the passages and chambers. So outside, yes, there's some erosion, but inside, where most of the stone is also granite, a lot of the stone in the passages, there doesn't seem to be much erosion.
Which that erosion on the south side would also seem to indicate that it had probably been there pretty close to the same time span as the Sphinx had.
Absolutely. Most people that try to understand the Great Pyramid in terms of its technology acknowledge that ancient Egypt was unable to build the Great Pyramid. So they put the construction of the Great Pyramid further back in time to probably before the last catastrophe, if you will, and to a very ancient civilization that had some high examples of technological ability. So that's probably the Great Pyramid was built much earlier than we've been told by people who cannot demonstrate how the Great Pyramid was built.
Yeah, well, there had to be some kind of an explanation for the water erosion, because I mean, ever since the last ice age, as I understand it, that area has been desert. I mean, where would all the water come from to erode it on the outside? After it became mostly desert, for some time there's even the pyramid in the Sphinx, I think, was partly buried in sand, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, for thousands of years, but possibly for 10,000 years it wasn't buried in sand, and both of those structures existed in a savanna-type climate, or even tropical, before the last ice age. So yes, there's been a lot of research on the erosion of the stones in that area, and by primarily Dr. Robert Schoch, who I believe teaches at Boston University, and I mean he's stellar in his credentials. So a lot of erosion. Another example of a possibility for erosion in the Sphinx enclosure is water from the Great Pyramid. Let's say it was used to run a powerful machinery or used to generate electricity. After that, it could have ran downhill to the Sphinx enclosure, and that would be another source of water that would cause when we say erosion, we're talking horrific erosion in the Sphinx enclosure. So the water from the Great Pyramid water pump could have contributed to that erosion.
Yeah, I saw pictures of that on TV, by the way. Robert Schoch's been on the History Channel before, and so has his partner John Gray at the time. And when they were, they showed close-up pictures, and you could tell this is something that was going on for a long period of time before the last ice age. It didn't look like the people before then had been keeping up the repair on it, so to speak. But it does. It leads you to a lot of questions. And I think you mentioned on there something about the capstone. Now, I was under the impression that the Great Pyramid didn't have a capstone.
Well, there's certainly people that say that it did, and there's people that say that it didn't. There's no remaining evidence to indicate that there was either way. People with a religious interpretation of the Great Pyramid, feeling that the Great Pyramid was like prophecy in stone, just simply say it didn't have a capstone, but there's no real physical or scientific evidence to indicate either way. But if there was a capstone, it would have probably been set in place using the system described in my book. It's
right.
interesting that the Erie Canal, long time ago, 1830s or so, and it was a 4.5-foot deep ditch, but the barges could handle a payload of 70 tons, which is the size of the largest stones in the Great Pyramid. So in the 1830s, regular working people could move a 70-ton payload, and if you go all the way through the Erie Canal, it moves stones higher than the Great Pyramid. But in modern times, highly trained experts, Egyptologists, can't move a heavy payload even 1 inch.
Which makes me think about Coral Castle, but before I mention that any further, Paul was also asking in the chat room, so what did they use to pump the water into and through the pyramid?
Okay. How did the Great Pyramid water pump work? That's a good question. When the Great Pyramid was under construction, the first thing that was done was they built a passage down 100 feet below the surface of the bedrock and built a large chamber down there, the subterranean chamber, and some associated passages and cuttings. And then they also built a passage from that chamber up through the mound that the Great Pyramid is built on. And we feel that when it was operational, was a water pump similar to a hydraulic ram water pump, although much more sophisticated. And that water pump supplied water to the ponds created by the casing stones and supplied water for the water locks. You need a supply of water for the highest water lock in a series of water locks. So just as modern man, the first thing they do when they build a skyscraper is bring in the lifting device, the tall, slender crane, if you will. Well, the original builders of the Great Pyramid did a similar thing. They built a way to lift stones, but they lifted their stones from below up in terms of using the buoyancy of water. And the subterranean chamber and passages were that method of pumping water. And then ultimately, when the Great Pyramid was built, the other passages and chambers pumped water similar to a water pump that you can look up on the internet called the Humphrey pump, and it uses combustion to create a vacuum which lifts water up. And the Humphrey pump is down in Australia. Fascinating pump. It's an internal combustion pump, but it's basically just a big chamber, if you will. No crankshaft, no piston. And that pump pumped, I believe, over 1 million gallons an hour. So it's a big...
That's a lot of liquid.
Yeah, it uses the water itself as a liquid piston. Very fascinating pump. And it kind of gives you a taste of what the Great Pyramid, how it worked. It's quite sophisticated, and I'm actually writing another book that describes the operation of the pump in great detail. The book that I have out now talks about how it was assembled, that fascinating assembly process. So there's a lot of research going on that we're compiling into manuscripts to disseminate to the general public. A lot of interest, that type of thing.
Well, I was just going to mention also, before I forgot, that your website, and I mentioned it earlier, is www.thepump.org. And you also have a personal site at www.stephenmyers.org.
Yes.
And then you're also, if they go to www.guidesofpyramid.com, that's the research association that you're a part of. And I believe you're on the board of directors over there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the advisory board, yes.
They're the advisory board. Yeah, and I want to comment on the fact that, if you don't mind me putting in a plug for them, that
Do it. They're great.
Yeah, that's what I was fixing to say. That I happen to know some of the people that's on this here board, and they're some of the most knowledgeable people with some of the highest integrity. And I happen to know that this is a group of people that really, honestly, they have the know-how, they have the academic backing and that, and they have the interest in finding out what really did happen versus just going with mainstream academia on whatever agenda seems to go with the flow, in other words. So, there's a great site over there. They got a lot of information. A lot of the people on the board of directors have posted their own articles on the site, and it can give you some idea of some of the research that they've been doing. Almost everybody handles a different aspect of the actual research. For instance, Stephen here is researching the part about the water pump, while Stephen Myler is working on the part about the spirituality, part of where the people would use the pyramid for a initiation purposes. So, there's different people looking into different aspects, trying to learn as much as they can about the pyramid and what all has gone on there. So I wanted to put that out there for them, because I think they could stand to learn a lot if they go to that site, and to yours as well.
That's for sure. Yeah, the GizaPyramid.com. Yeah, they if you're interested in the Great Pyramid, that's a tremendous starting place, and they have every kind of information about the Great Pyramid you want. So, yeah, check them out. And again, I'm on the advisory board for that group, so it's wonderful.
Now, Paul was also asking, how did we get the blocks on and off the barges to start with, that they had to use water to float it up into place? That's an interesting question.
Certainly. Imagine they have a barge on with a stone on it, okay, and they want to put it in place, let's say, and these are heavy stones. You can't move them by hand without any handling scars or that type of thing. So let's say the stone overhung the barge on both sides, for example. Well, if you would move the barge between two supports, massive stones, and then put water into the barge would lower and the stone would lower down on those two supports. And then the barge would move even a little bit lower, and then you could move the barge out of the way. Can you see that in your mind's eye?
Yeah, I think I can.
Yeah, what that would do would be to in effect take the stone off the barge without using any massive back muscles. Then they would bring another barge, a very specialized barge, kind of like a forklift, if you will, that would hold the stone on just one side, and then have ropes to hold the stone. My book talks about this a lot because it's a big question. How do they move and manipulate the stones and set them in place? Well, if that barge already had water in it, it would be lowered. So then you would put it where it would hold that stone, and then remove the water from the barge, and the powerful force of buoyancy would lift the stone off of those supports with this specialized barge. Then you could move the barge, let's say, to the wall of casing stones, and set this stone that you have, another casing stone, you could set it down with very gently by controlling the amount of water in the barge. And again, there's specialized methods to move various size stones. The 70-ton stones would be moved using very special barges. And the book again talks about that. It's well illustrated, and much of the demonstrations for moving heavy payloads is already being accomplished every single day. The Erie Canal moved enough weight in just 2 years that it could move all the stones of the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid weighs about 6 million tons, let's say. Well, the Erie Canal, the Erie Canal moved that much cargo in 2 years.
See, I never knew that. So that's interesting information. Now, Paul's had a couple of more questions, and he was asking, how did we get the stone onto the barge first?
Okay, the stones were quarried, much of the stones, not all, and there's scholarly debate, on the other side of the river. There are quarries that are across the river from the Great Pyramid. There's also quarries that are like 400 miles upstream for the granite, is what we're told. Well, those from those quarrying operations, I would suspect that they used water and barges in a similar manner as they used to move the stones off the barges. But all researchers agree that stones on barges were a part of the construction of the Great Pyramid. All Egyptologists agree with that. Certainly all alternative researchers that I know of agree that stones were on barges when they came across the river towards the building site. So that's my book talks about the stone moving techniques and that type of thing.
Right. Now, Paul was also asking, how did they get the stone on the resting poles? And I'm not sure what he means by resting poles.
Well, I think probably what he's getting at is how did they get them on the supports? Well, imagine the two supports were in the middle of a pond that's probably 4 feet deep. The pond that was on the top of layer under construction of the Great Pyramid. That pond, let's say it had two supports, and the barge was just floated between those two supports. Water was allowed to enter the barge, so the barge would lower, and then the stone that was on the barge would rest gently onto those two supports. Again, there's some pictures on our website about how the Great Pyramid was built, and that show this what I call the construction pond and some water locks. So, and the book again has several chapters about stone moving techniques.
Okay, now Paul I don't think he quite understood something in there, because he said, I know the theory and the reasons, but how did they get the stones on the barge, not how did they quarry it? And he said that he's not getting the impression you're not explaining the part of the system that he's asking about exactly. You're kind of getting the quarrying effect, but not how they actually got it onto the barge. Like, I guess I'm assuming once it was to the quarried into the pond, how did they get it onto the barge itself is, I think, what he's trying to specify.
Okay, that's fair enough. Probably they quarried them in a quarry that could be flooded. So if a stone was quarried and on a couple of supports, you could have a pond in the quarry with a barge, and then that barge could have been partially flooded and moved underneath a stone that was supported on each end. Then if you remove the water from the barge would raise up, and the powerful force of buoyancy would lift the stone off of the two supports, and the stone would be supported by the barge. And this could occur quite rapidly, like water locks operate quite rapidly. So this would be a similar type of thing. Certainly Egyptologists would say, well, it was just dragged onto a barge, but Egyptologists have never moved a stone on or off of a barge in the entire science of Egyptology. But again, the powerful force of buoyancy and barges. If you like a submarine, if you would remove water from a barge, it would raise and lower and have tremendous force to lift those heavy stones.
Okay. I'm talking to Paul here. Oh wait, somebody's calling in. Let me go ahead and take that call real quick. But I was going to say that Paul is still not. Said we're still not quite getting exactly what he's asking. So there seems to be a communication gap going on. So I've asked him to call in. Let's see who this is that's calling in now. Caller 401, you're on the air.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah, this is. Hello?
Hello? Yeah, no, I'm just listening. I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. My apologies. I'll put you back on hold. That was my mistake. I didn't think to look and see that there wasn't no hand up. Usually if they want to, some people listen on the phones. If they want to ask a question, they usually hit 1 and it raises a hand on the board. And I was so busy looking at the switchboard in the chat room that I forgot to think and check for the hand.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, so that's how it was done. Now, I'll tell you something about the quarrying operation. That is a lost technology that is still lost. That technology is not fully understood, how they could quarry limestone and also granite stones to such a precision that it is mind-boggling. It cannot be demonstrated. Egyptologists say it was done by hand. That is incorrect. That is a falsehood. So the quarrying operations is a lost technology, still lost. But the idea of water locks, that is a technology that is the only thing lost about it was our modern understanding that ancient Egypt, that the Great Pyramid in ancient Egypt used water locks to build it. In fact, water locks are a 21st century technology. The Erie Canal used it to great success, but the Panama Canal, they're building larger water locks in the Panama Canal. So it's a 21st century. It's our technology of choice to move our most heaviest objects. And I feel that in ancient times, it was the technology of choice to move their most heaviest objects.
Okay, we got Paul on the phone real quick. And by the way, it sounds like there's a lot more going on in technology today than I'm abreast of. I need to catch up. Okay, Paul, you're on the air.
Hi, Royce.
Hey, Paul, how you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing just great. Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly what you were asking in the chat room, and we seem to have a communication gap, so I thought perhaps it might be less confusing if you called in and asked direct.
Yeah. Hi, Stephen.
Hi. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, welcome. I don't quite... Sorry, I've watched a lot of things and read a lot of things in Egypt. I don't quite get the idea behind getting the stones on supports, because I wouldn't know how they'd do that in the first place as they're quarrying it. And also, if you've got a 70-ton block, I don't see how you could get a barge big enough to float it, although I know they probably did, in the way that you say they do by flooding the barge to go under it. I don't see how that would work.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you need to read my book. The book has a lot of illustrations, and there's also some illustrations on the website, thepump.org. But imagine a stone in the quarry, let's say, that happens to be supported on both ends. Let's say a casing stone. They're about, to make a long story short, let's say about 5 feet by 5 feet by 7 feet. That's 16 tons. But it's supported on both ends at the quarry. Well, let's say they can flood the quarry and bring a barge underneath that stone. And then let's say the barge had some water in it, so it was low in the water. Well, if you remove the water from the barge would raise up underneath the casing stone and lift that casing stone up off of the supports. Then the barge would be supporting the casing stone, and then they could move the barge all the way from the Nile River, from the quarry to the Nile River, and then up through the water locks to the pond on top of the Great Pyramid during construction, and then reverse the process to remove the stone from the barge. So does that help a little bit?
Yeah, but how did they get on the supports in the quarry?
Okay, that's the quarrying operations. They probably had an ability to put the stone on the supports. When they're quarried, they're right in the rock, if you will. You know, they're right in the ground.
Yeah. I know how a quarry
and
works.
Yeah. Well, no one on Earth knows how the quarry worked then, because that's a technology that cannot be demonstrated, that they could cut 70-ton stones with extreme precision, machine precision, like within 10,000ths of an inch. So that is a lost technology.
Somebody put the theory forward that it was laser cut.
I didn't catch that.
Somebody put forward a theory a while back that the stones were cut through by lasers.
Lasers, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you cut the stones on laser, you could probably cut away underneath and have room for a barge. So that we feel that the buoyancy of water was used like a forklift, if you will, to manipulate the stones and set them in place, especially at the building site. But the book has a lot of illustrations about the processes used to move various stones in various applications. So it sounds like you have an interest in that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I've always been interested in Egyptology. I like the theory behind it. As to the capstone that you say was or wasn't there, because nobody actually knows. From what I can figure out from things I've seen and done and looked at it, I reckon it was probably a huge crystal, and it was part of a network between all the pyramids and all the different continents.
Well, that's nice. It'd be neat to have some sort of evidence to support that, some physical evidence. I know that people assert a lot of technologies to ancient structures, and it is important in our age, with this great oil spill in the Gulf Coast, that we can develop ancient technologies that can help us in modern times. If the pyramids could communicate with each other or transmit energy or any of that, that would be a wonderful thing to develop in modern times, because we've got to get off of our addiction to oil. It's a tremendous problem for our modern age. The transfer of money to the Middle East. When we buy oil, we fund the terrorists, and the environmental degradation there in the Gulf states. So yeah, I believe that if there's a technology involved in ancient times that can help us, we need to, as a civilization, redevelop that ancient technology for modern times.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I reckon, or I can figure out that it was a huge crystal that was sitting on top of it. But I think there's more to it than just a water pump. If it was a water pump, that is. I'm not disbanding your theory. I'm just I'm open to suggestions.
Well, if you get a chance, read the book. But whatever the Great Pyramid was, I believe that it can help us, our modern civilization that's very troubled, and I think that it can help us in some very tangible ways. I believe that the Great Pyramid was a transformer It transformed poverty into prosperity. It transformed work into leisure. It transformed poverty into wealth. It transformed the desert into a garden. It was used for scientific purposes and for irrigation and probably for power-heavy machinery. So that's the type of thing that we need to understand. Whatever the technologies were, including the stone cutting technologies, need to be redeveloped for our modern but troubled world.
So could the two smaller pyramids have been generators?
I've heard that.
And then
I've heard that idea.
And then you got the other pyramids that are down near, in the same area, but down nearer the river. It's even smaller again. So maybe they were collectors of power.
You know, every month I pay an electric bill, and if the Great Pyramids were generators, I sure wish someone would develop that technology so I wouldn't have to pay so much in an electric bill. What's important is not just saying that the Great Pyramid was such and such, but to develop these high technologies for our modern and troubled world. That's why I founded a nonprofit foundation as an instrument to redevelop these ancient technologies for modern times. And we're doing a number of things at our foundation. We're now that the book is out, we're probably going to develop a documentary and put that on YouTube. So if anyone out there wants to help us with animations for our documentary, and that will help a documentary, because much of this is very visual. That's why there's a lot of illustrations in the book. So we want to do the documentary. We want to do some more on-site research. We have a research facility here that have ongoing research and development of this ancient technology. So there's a lot going on. And, you know, if anyone wants to be involved or help or be associated with our nonprofit foundation, they can. So they can do that by contacting us through our website at thepump.org.
I've just been sent a message with a question, if you're willing to answer it.
Sure.
Yeah? Sorry, it's Anastasia. It's her mum. She sent me the message. She says, how do you have a machine if the pyramid is the machine and you don't have the pyramid first to move the blocks? Where is the water that moves the block from the barge to the pyramid site? The other two pyramids would have to have been built before the large one in order to be an electrical generator to aid in the building of the large one.
Well,
which I think is quite clever.
It would be interesting to know how the other two pyramids generated electricity, and if they did, that would sure be important in our day and age. We think that the lower passages were created before the Great Pyramid was built, the subterranean chamber and associated cuttings. And those cuttings were in effect like a hydraulic ram water pump, although much more sophisticated. And we feel that supplied water to build the Great Pyramid. There's speculation about the other pyramids, and they didn't need to be water pumps because they could have used the water from the Great Pyramid water pump to supply the water needed to build the other pyramids. So why duplicate? You know, you don't need two, if you will, in effect. So it was, you know, there's a lot of ideas, but it's not what's important is not understanding about the other pyramids. What is important is redeveloping this ancient technology, this high technology, to help our modern but troubled world. This ancient technology that helped the original builders help their civilization, I believe this ancient technology can help our modern civilization. It's interesting, the largest structure in Egypt, and in fact the largest structure in the whole continent of Africa, is in the Nile Valley. and that structure is the High Aswan Dam, and it is a water pump. It generates electricity, and that electricity powers a massive irrigation project throughout the Nile Valley. It irrigates above the floodplain. It irrigates year-round. So in modern times, people in the Nile Valley built a water pump. I'm saying in ancient times, people in the Nile Valley built a water pump.
So which pyramid was built first?
I would say it doesn't really matter, but I would say the Great Pyramid was probably built before most, if not all, of the pyramids in the Nile Valley.
If I remember rightly, that will go against what all other Egyptologists think, because they think the pyramids were built first.
Absolutely. I go against them 1,000%. They can't even make one surface of one casing stone. They can't even move a stone around the corner of a spiral ramp. There's much that they can't do, much that I say that they're very incorrect on. Certainly the chronology of the construction of the Great Pyramids, I would say that they are very incorrect on. They can't demonstrate anything. At our nonprofit foundation, we're offering a $50,000 scholarship for anyone who can make 5 casing stones and move them on and off a barge and set them in like a row, 3 and then 2 on top.
Wasn't there
5 casing stones.
Wasn't there a thing a few years back? Wasn't there a thing a few years back? I saw it in television, where an Egyptologist actually built a small pyramid by using, it looked like scaffolding, but also sand built up around the outside of the pyramid, sliding the blocks up into place.
Wrong. What they did was they moved a few 1.5-ton stones.
But that's
ridiculous.
still, yeah, but that still shows you part of their theory that they moved the stones by sliding them up and putting them into place, not by using water.
Yeah, they never made a casing stone. They never moved a full-size stone. Do you know that I can pick up a I can lift 1,000 pounds because I can lift up a little tiny stone? No, that's incorrect. They were ridiculous in their demonstrations. It's farcical. Egyptologists cannot even move one casing stone. I don't think they've ever moved a 16-ton stone yet, one inch. I know that if they can do what the original builders did, we will pay them $50,000. Moving the itty-bitty stones doesn't demonstrate how big stones were moved.
Could you personally get a barge and move a 70-ton block with that barge in the theory that you suggested?
It's been done thousands of times in the Erie Canal. It's done thousands of times every single day on Earth.
No,
a 70-ton payload on a barge.
Can you take the type of barge that they had then and do it today?
There are no barges. There are no evidence for barges used to build the Great Pyramid. There's no pictures of barges that used the Great Pyramid. There's no physical evidence. But all researchers agree that there were barges because the stones were from quarries across the river.
So what's to say they didn't build something to drag it across the river?
People in the 1830s could move stones on barges payloads on barges that were 70 tons in the 1830s. Egyptology, the entire science, cannot move one 70-ton payload 1 inch. They could get a Abrams tank or even a locomotive. They're both about 70 tons and move it.
Then surely to prove your theory,
it would destroy my theory.
Well, surely to prove your theory, you should see if they can build a barge that you would have thought would have been around about the time when they built the pyramid, and then move the block.
That would be a wonderful documentary. To do that would be a wonderful documentary. It would usurp and surpass everything that Egyptology has ever done. But instead of building a barge, you just go over there to New York, look at the Erie Canal or any other canals in Europe or anywhere else, and you can see 70-ton payloads being moved in ditches 4.5 feet deep.
But it's a different type of barge from what you're saying.
No, it does take a barge.
Yeah, but you're talking about a barge that you can flood with water and then...
Okay, guys.
Yeah?
Pardon my interruption, but a couple of things are going on here. One, the show's about to end in 6 minutes if I don't extend it, and I need to ask the guest if he'd like to extend. And two, I got to be honest with both of y'all. When y'all talk over each other like that, it is hard to understand what's being said with two voices going at once.
I agree. But all I can say is, sure, if you want to extend the show, I have no scheduling constraints. But Egyptology has not demonstrated virtually anything that they say in their storybooks, and much of what they say is incorrect. If they can make 5 casing stones and move them, like it talks about in our website, the way they say the stones were moved, we'll give them $50,000. Go to our website to find out about our research scholarship. And all they have to do is move some casing stones the way they say they were moved. It has never been demonstrated.
Paul, are you still there?
Yeah, it's all right saying it's never been demonstrated. What I'm saying is, what's stopping you and the foundation building a barge that you think would have been like what they had at the time, that you could flood and sink and then pump water back out of to float again to lift this block? Surely that would prove your theory more than anything.
I like your idea. That's an excellent idea. And we are actually proposing a number of different demonstrations for documentaries. Certainly to fund building a large boat would have some cost issues for us at our foundation. And our resources are being used for other purposes than for that. To be honest, most people acknowledge that with using buoyancy you could lift 70 tons. Submarines and other applications in large scale certainly demonstrate that. So there's some other demonstrations that we're going to work on and fund through a documentary. So that's one of our goals. But I appreciate you wanting to see that done, and it would be very visual and wonderful to see.
Couldn't you get one of the big universities in the States to help? One that deals with Egyptology and things? Surely they would be willing to help with something like this to prove a theory. It would help them no end, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, you'd think so. Egyptology should have enough money to fund that because they don't do their own demonstrations. They move itty-bitty stones and tell you how great big stones are moved. But we're working on that. We'll, programs like this help get the word out, and we're going to see what we can do on that and other demonstrations, certainly.
Well, if you ever do that demonstration with the block, let me know and I'll come over and I'll help.
Hey, I appreciate that very much. Well, if you get a chance, go to our website and there's some pictures about how the stones were moved on water locks to build the Great Pyramid, and that might be interesting for you.
Yeah, I'll have a look.
Well, great.
Is there anything else, Paul?
No, I was just trying to get a few things clear, that was all. Thanks, Roy.
Oh, hey, thanks for calling in. I appreciate it. You normally don't do that.
No, not normally. Thanks, Stephen.
By the way, Paul, that would be a
calling.
good chance while you're still here if you want to invite him to your show.
Well, I've got to figure out when the next show is going to be honest. But if Stephen doesn't mind, if I can get the information off Royce and then go forward a little from there and then get in touch with you and see if I can set something up.
Well, great. That would be great.
Yeah?
Send me an email.
Yeah, I'll get the information off Royce later, and I'll get in touch with you.
Okay, great. Oh,
Okay,
that
thanks,
would be
Stephen.
interesting. I appreciate that. Yeah, and we can discuss some very specific issues in detail. That would be wonderful.
Yeah?
Yeah, and
cool.
it sounds like he's got a lot of specific issues he'd like to have answered.
Well, I think we can work it out.
Well, I'll need to read more on the website and things to come up with questions now, won't I?
Oh, I have no doubt that you'll be able to come up with questions because I noticed you were really good. You and Anastasia and Judith and all of y'all are really great at coming up with really wonderful questions.
I suppose I better let you know something, Steve. I'm actually a psychic, and some of the visions I've seen are to do with the things like this, and it's crystals on top of it, and it's like a network between the different countries, like Angkor Wat in Vietnam, Machu Picchu in South America, and there's another one in the South Pacific on an island. I can't quite remember where it is, but it's like a network between the four of them, the four areas, with these crystals crisscrossing. And that's the image I've got, and that's what I was saying.
Yeah, I wonder if that would have an application in modern times.
Need to see what I can come up with more.
Paul, make sure you let me know when your next show is going to be and shoot me an email so I can send you Stephen's email.
Yep, will do.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Okay, thanks.
Talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen.
Thank you for calling.
I hope I didn't just cut him loose too soon. If I did that too soon, Paul, I apologize. But yeah, Paul attends a lot of my shows here, and he's always got a lot of wonderful questions. He really does. Him and Anastasia, I think they're all family, which would explain how the family that asks questions together stays together.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of questions about the research, and it's very visual how a lot of this was done. That's why we do. It's new information, a new idea, and there's a lot to work to be done in terms of like documentaries and that type of thing. There's been documentaries about crystals and that type of thing, but there hasn't been. They've never helped anybody. Let me put it that way. There's that technology has never been developed to help anyone, and that's what we want to do, is develop this ancient technology that was used by the ancient geniuses to help their civilization. And our civilization needs help, and that's what we want to do, is actually develop the technology of this water pumping technology to help our modern but troubled world. So that's our goal. And if someone can use crystals to help people, that's wonderful. But the exact our foundation is focused on the technology, and I'm not sure how just a crystal on the top of a Great Pyramid would really communicate with other pyramids. So much work needs to be done on researching ancient technologies.
Yeah, and I think a lot of more experiments need to be made would probably help determine what other purposes could be used as well. Personally, I thought that theory about lowering the barge and then raising it up under the block or the casing stone was really kind of a clever idea, because you're using the water in the barge to do all the work, Mike and Eric.
Absolutely, and that's not because they were benevolent. It's because the weight of the stone makes it impossible to move the stones using back muscles. It literally can't be done, even though.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, even though the books say that in all the libraries of the world, it literally can't be done. So they use this water pump, the passages and chambers before the Great Pyramid was built, supplied the water for these water locks, and then ultimately it was a water pump that served many uses. The largest and most expensive structure in North America, made in the United States, when built, was the Grand Coulee Dam in central Washington, and it is about 13 times bigger than the Great Pyramid in volume, but it is built primarily to pump water. The largest and most expensive structure in North America, when built, was built to pump water. It irrigates much of central Washington state, and I've been there, and it's a massive water pump. And it's a big structure with no writing on it, oddly shaped passages and chambers, and ultimately it pumps water. So that's what the Great Pyramid is. Big structure by a river in the middle of a desert, no writing on it, oddly shaped passages and chambers, built to pump water.
So did you maybe get the idea for the Great Pyramid from the site you're referring to in Washington?
No. This research is the origination of the idea that the Great Pyramid is a self-powered water pump came from one man, and that one man was Edward Kunkel, and he lived in Ohio, and he has passed away in the early 1980s. He passed away, and he, in 1962, wrote a privately published book called Pharaoh's Pump, and it was the first book written in the last 1,000 years about the Great Pyramid being a self-powered water pump. And that's why we named our foundation the Pharaoh's Pump Foundation, to honor him and his book about the Great Pyramid being a water pump. And certainly our foundation, there's been a lot more research since he published his work, and we've compiled much of that research into the book Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. So anyway, that's where the idea came from. We've developed and advanced from his research, and we have this book that just came out this year, in fact, just a few months ago, actually. So the interest has been very high, too.
Now, I can tell you that we've got your book, The Lost Technologies, up right here on the show page for anybody that is interested in getting it. And like you say, it's got illustrations in it. I would recommend it to anybody. I mean, just based on what you've been telling me here, shows that you had a lot of thought that went into this here. And the fact that it's got those illustrations, I think would help people to, if you have a visual, it's sometimes easier to perceive what you can, things that when you describe them, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, there's at Amazon.com, you can look inside at the book at a number of pages and the illustrations, and also read some of the reviews. So, but it's a fascinating theory, and the interest again is very high. There's people that say they read it and they tell me a lot of people say it's compelling, and you don't get that much. Certainly, ideas of crystals and of people humming to move the stones and all of that. There's stories of all of that, but this is like a real world workable solution to building the Great Pyramid. So that's it's been an interesting endeavor to this life quest to create this foundation, to write this book, and to do this type of research.
Now, I got the impression that your end of the research has nothing to do with the cutting of the stones, and you don't have anything more to offer on that than just maybe a possible theory, that your main area of focus was just on the actual moving and placing of the stones, right?
That's correct. Actually, there's a very important point that I make in the book about cutting the stones, and that it is a high technology that is still lost. It is something that would be very useful and valuable today to be able to cut stones with extreme precision on a massive scale. But that's a technology that, like I say, is still lost. But we are talking a lot about technologies that were lost, but that is being rediscovered in our modern age, like the use of water locks and the purpose of the Great Pyramids' oddly shaped passages and chambers to be a functioning water pump. So what sets me apart from Egyptology is they say they know how the stones were cut, and it was cut using hand tools, but I am superior to Egyptologists because I know that that's incorrect.
Okay, now I got to be honest with you. I don't see it. I mean, you're talking about stones that have got to be how many feet thick being cut with hand tools?
Right. It can't be done.
I don't even think we today have a saw thick enough to cut through anything that thick.
Well, most Egyptologists say it was done by just pounding stones up against the other stones. But the precision is so precise, like 10,000ths of an inch over or greater over a surface like, let's say, 5 by 7 feet, that it can't be done. And Egyptology does not use the scientific method to demonstrate what they say was done. So no, it's not done. And we're in a new understanding now. Much of Egyptology is going by the wayside in terms of what they say, and there's like a vacuum of understanding.
Like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Okay.
And that's just an indicator that much of what they say is incorrect. If they can't even figure out how one surface of one casing stone was made, there's probably a whole bunch of stuff that is incorrect about what they say, including the chronology of when the pyramids were built, including their purpose, and including a whole bunch of things that they're probably very, very profoundly wrong on.
Exactly.
And, there's independent researchers like myself and those people at the GizaPyramid.com. Those people and myself are independent researchers that's trying to tear away the falsehoods and tear away all these incorrect ideas and try to gain a greater and truer understanding of what the Great Pyramid is and what it means to modern mankind.
Right. Yeah. And another thing about what you were saying a minute ago about those stones, banging them together, okay, I see a lot of problems with that. One being the actual strength to slam two stones together. The other being getting it, like you said, a perfect cut when you do it with absolutely no chipping of stone.
I know it's an odd notion, but that's what they still say it today. The books that come out currently that are from Egyptologists still say that. The Egyptology has become like a mystery cult, like a religion, that they verify their tenets of their religion by edicts instead of engaging in the scientific method. It's kind of odd and it's kind of bizarre, but all of that needs to be cleared away and put in the trash heap of ideas, and we need to understand these new ideas about this ancient wonder. So it's a 45-story skyscraper that was built with high technology, and I feel that high technology will have some very beneficial effects for our modern but very troubled world.
Well, when I talked to Dennis Balthaser about the pyramid research, he says his research leads him to believe that the people before the Egyptians, that he calls the Kemetans, and I might be pronouncing it wrong, or who he thinks built the pyramids. Do you think that he's correct in this here assessment, or that maybe the Kemetans might have became later to be known as the Atlanteans?
Well, I like him. What I like is that he puts the construction of the Great Pyramid much earlier, because he acknowledges that the ancient Egyptians were unable to build it. They just literally were unable to build it, and so he's really sharp that way. Exactly what the people were called or what language they spoke is not the focus of our research. Our research is focused primarily on how it was built and why it was built. So, but he is right in terms that it was built much earlier than Egyptologists say it was, and who built it is up to scholarly debate. But what is important, though, again, is the geniuses. Right, the geniuses developed this fascinating technology that that helped them. That was the purpose of building that structure, and that fascinating technology can help us. If we can pump water very cheaply, we can create electricity very cheaply. Instead of having centralized generating power plants like nuclear, hydroelectric, that type of thing, everyone in their backyard can have a small, not a pyramid, but just a small device with passages and chambers that can pump water, and then that pumped water would be used to create electricity. So that's one application for our civilization. In the third world country, of course, this would be used primarily for irrigation. So it's there's a lot of potential and a lot of research that needs to be done. Funding has been a struggle, certainly, because it's so unconventional. But we are doing a lot of different things. You can read our mission statement on our website and some of our goals. We ask people to mention us on their Twitter feeds or whatever, or to mention us in their Facebook page or MySpace. If you can do that, that would help us a great deal. And so there's helping get the word out is an important phase of what we're doing right now. And funding, of course, is a struggle, but we're working on that. And it's been interesting. I can tell you that.
Now, your foundation is different from the Giza Pyramid Foundation. So now, do you have your own group of academics that are working with you at your foundation?
Oh yeah, we have our headquarters here in southwestern Oregon. We have a research facility here. We have pro bono legal counsel, board of directors, advisors, all of that. It's a foundation, a small foundation to be sure, but we have some big ideas certainly. We're equipping our facility, doing some experimentation, certainly some research. We have a library with a number of books, but also some unpublished manuscripts from people that have sent us. We're becoming a clearinghouse of ideas for not just the Great Pyramid, but other unusual technologies, both from ancient and modern times. So there's a lot going on. Certainly compiled the research into a book that is available now. So it's been interesting. There's a lot going on, a lot of things people can do to help us. They can get the book. We ask people that after they buy the book and read it, donate it to their local high school library. So to help get the word out. You know, that might hurt book sales, but it'll help get the word out. So we're trying to do a lot of different things.
Well, I think I've done a little bit of a share to help you with getting the word out, because I've got this here about you on my website, Paranormal Palace Radio. I got it on my. I got a site that's kind of like MySpace. It's called the Paranormal Club, and I've got it listed over there. I put it out on my Ning. I put it out all over Yahoo groups. So the word should be getting around to somebody.
Well, that's great. I sure appreciate that, and it really helps. Shows like yours and others have really helped get the word out. We live in a new age, where we're with the internet and with technology, cell phones. it's a revolution of ideas now, not just
yeah.
this. But with 2012 coming up, people understand that it's going to be not just a doomsday, but a new beginning. You know, a new hope for our civilization. A lot of ways we're struggling.
Yeah.
Here in our world, and so there's a lot of hope and potential, and that's the type of stuff that we talk about in the book. Not just moving stones, but the new beginning and the new application of these technologies. I read, and I
or
don't
like
have
a return of the old technology.
Right. Yeah, a redevelopment of this old technology from these geniuses that had a kind of a higher understanding or more in tune with physics. Instead of developing these power systems that we developed, they developed a power system that kept the environment clean, you know, and it had a low cost and that type of thing. So
right.
the Great Pyramid was an investment more than an expense to build. You know, it paid off 1,000 times over the cost of creating it. So that's the type of thing we're talking about. We give glory to the past, but we also have a vision for the future.
Right. Well, I know that, for example, it's a pretty commonly known fact now that the pyramid has inside lighting that is not being done with the power plants that we use today. It doesn't have electricity like our homes have, but yet there's a source of light inside that pyramid that they have not yet explained how it's getting in there, that this lost technology, I think, is a part of.
Certainly there is. There's some hieroglyphs in some temples in Egypt that show something that looks like what they call a Crookes tube, and they were used for a lot of applications. One is for illumination, also possibly for X-rays and that type of thing. You see that a lot on the documentaries on TV. So there's a lot of different applications of technology that were used in ancient times. A number of examples are medical. In ancient times, they did brain surgeries. There's physical evidence of people that their skulls were operated on, and they could tell that they survived the operation because the skull started to heal. And there's a whole bunch of other applications. Cesarean sections were done in ancient Egypt, which I would consider a very high technology. I certainly wouldn't want to do that. But so
there's a lot of technology that was lost during the Dark Ages that we need to get back.
Absolutely. And in some ways, in some very profound ways, we right now are living in very dark ages with that horrific oil spill in the Gulf. That's just a consequence of our addiction to oil. And, what we've got to get off of oil. And this technology that we're talking about in the Great Pyramid is an application to reduce our dependency on oil. So hopefully, like I say, with funding constraints, our development of this technology has been hampered. For a benefactor or some sort of funding source, or even a grants writer. If you know of any grants writer, you can send them our way. So that's what we're doing. Okay.
Well, we've got like 8 minutes remaining, and I wanted to ask you if there's anything I might not have thought to ask or has not been asked by anyone else that you would like to cover.
Well, just that they can contact us at our foundation, and we also have a phone number that they can call us at, of course. It's 541-824-0032. And they can give us a call and talk to us. And certainly our email is info@thepump.org, or they can go to Amazon.com and look inside, in fact, that book, Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. But they can also, people can help by putting it on Twitter, their Facebook, or emailing a few people and say, hey, there's a new idea that this fellow says might help people. We have you can become a sponsor by putting a link on your website. That would help. If you want to do that, that would be wonderful. We also appreciate prayer. If you want to pray for us, that means a lot to us. Trust me. We need all the help we can get. We need some equipment for our research facility, some tooling. You can ask us about that. We're also are planning another trip to Egypt. And if you want to be involved in going to Egypt with us, that would be wonderful. So there's a lot going on, as well as we do need a grant writer, and we also need some help with our website. So if you're a web person or if you're a grant writer, you can get a hold of us. And again, I appreciate being on your show, and I ask people to seek truth. Don't just believe what you read in the Egyptology books at the library. Find out the real truth, and that's very important.
And I'll be the first one to sit up and say that there are tons of sources out here on the web. And, yes, it's true that not all of them are part of academia. But, you can always read this information and then see if there's other academics that might agree with it. You can also ask yourself which one is most likely to make sense to you. And,
Absolutely.
See who's making sense, because let's face it, academia is not always correct.
Absolutely.
No offense meant. If they are, they're God.
Yes, all endeavors of science have just scratched the surface, and new understandings replace old, and that's why they rewrite the books, even rewrite books on mathematics. But all the books on physics are being rewritten, and you need to understand that the theory must make sense. The theory must be consistent with the direct physical evidence, and the theory must also comply to the laws of physics. It must actually be doable, and it must also be verified through demonstration. So those are important issues that need to be addressed when believing a theory like a great big ramp or whatever. So,
or any theory, it doesn't really matter.
Any theory. Yes, I just ask people to.
The best intended of people can make a mistake.
Oh, absolutely. But I ask people to pursue truth and to understand that a revolution of understanding is going on in many fields of research.
Okay, now real quick, I always like to thank my guests for coming, because the truth of the matter is, I'm sure you realize, I couldn't have a show without them any more than I could have a show without a guest. I mean, my listeners. I always like to thank them for coming, and I always like to acknowledge the fact that I do realize that my show is partly dependent on them as well as the guests and myself as far as that goes, because I think so many people don't really appreciate their audience, and I do.
Well, that's wonderful.
Also, during the last remaining 4 minutes, have you got any other final thoughts?
Well, the main thing is for people to keep an open mind, for people to keep learning. I know so many people that have read something back when they were in high school. Oh, well, that's true. Well, what makes it true? Well, they read it in a book. Or I know people that can quote, books on Egyptology, but I say, well, where's the demonstration? Oh, well, there isn't any. It's pursue truth. And truth is very important in our world, politically, in terms of history, in terms of technology. We need to know the truth, and the truth is out there. So it takes diligence to do that type of thing. And I'm a researcher, and I expect other people to be researchers. That's what life's all about. And to me anyway, is to find out the truth. And I just ask people to understand what we are doing, and then to make a judgment on it. So read the book if you get a chance, and if you want to contact us, go ahead at our website, which is thepump.org.
Now, for all you radio hosts out there, y'all can email him at info@thepump.org if y'all would like to have him on your show. he was telling me before the show started that he'd be more than happy to be a guest and, share with your listening audience his views and his thoughts on the water pump and how he's arrived there, just like he did here today.
Well,
and I wanted to mention that because there's a few hosts that are sitting here listening right now.
Great. Well, that's great. Yeah, the interest has been tremendous, and it does make for a lively show. So, again, I appreciate being on your program. It really helps. You're doing a service to your listeners, but also to the world to get new ideas out there. I know TV, it's just the same old thing, and news doesn't talk about anything hardly anymore. But it's people like you that are making a difference in the world.
I think I appreciate that. And I got to tell you, the people that made Blog Talk Radio, they really had a good idea because the old standard AM FM could only cover a city, a part of a state or something, whereas Blog Talk can blanket the whole entire world. So
yes,
that was really a very interesting concept.
What a world we live in of technological ability. So that's probably the Great Pyramid was built much earlier than we've been told by people who cannot demonstrate how the Great Pyramid was built.
Yeah, well, there had to be some kind of an explanation for the water erosion, because ever since the last ice age, as I understand it, that area has been desert. Where would all the water come from to erode it on the outside? After it became mostly desert. For some time, there's even the pyramid in the Sphinx, I think, was partly buried in sand, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for thousands of years. But possibly for 10,000 years, it wasn't buried in sand. And both of those structures existed in a savanna-type climate, or even tropical, before the last ice age. So, yes, there's been a lot of research on the erosion of the stones in that area, and by primarily Dr. Robert Schock, who I believe teaches at Boston University, and he's stellar in his credentials. So, a lot of erosion. Another example of a possibility for erosion in the Sphinx enclosure is water from the Great Pyramid. Let's say it was used to run a powerful machinery or used to generate electricity. After that, it could have ran downhill to the Sphinx enclosure, and that would be another source of water that would cause when we say erosion, we're talking horrific erosion in the Sphinx enclosure. So the water from the Great Pyramid water pump could have contributed to that erosion.
Yeah, I saw pictures of that on TV, by the way. Robert Schock's been on the History Channel before, and so has his partner John Gray at the time. And when they were, they showed close-up pictures, and you could tell this is something that was going on for a long period of time before the last ice age. It didn't look like the people before then had been keeping up the repair on it, so to speak. But it does. It leads you to a lot of questions. And I think you mentioned on there something about the capstone. Now, I was under the impression that the Great Pyramid didn't have a capstone.
Well, there's certainly people that say that it did, and there's people that say that it didn't. There's no remaining evidence to indicate that there was either way. People with a religious interpretation of the Great Pyramid, feeling that the Great Pyramid was like prophecy in stone, just simply say, and the heaviest stones, 70-ton stones, the entire science since its inception till today has never moved a 70-ton payload 1 inch. So that's kind of interesting pieces of evidence that books about Egyptology don't really talk about, that they can sure tell a story, but they can't demonstrate what they're saying. So that's a problem with Egyptology.
Right. Which they got more than one problem, I think, with it. There's a lot of things in the past that are open for debate, I would say. Now, Paul was asking, Have they found any watermarks in the pyramids?
Well, certainly, like you mentioned a minute ago, there's a lot of water erosion on the Sphinx and also the Sphinx enclosure. And Robert Schoch, who I've met and we've talked, he theorizes that water came from possibly pre-Ice Age, if you will, when the Giza Plateau area was more of a savanna and more tropical, so there was more water. And that would put the construction of the Sphinx, anyway, farther back in time. There's some erosion on the Great Pyramid on the some of the remaining casing stones, especially those in the back, if you will. The ones in front have been repaired for tourist photo ops and that type of thing, but on the south side, if you will, those casing stones, when I was there, showed a lot of erosion from that pond that I talked about, the wall around the Great Pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
So that was that's some very evident erosion. But inside the Great Pyramid, there's not really erosion, because we believe that the water was quite filtered and fairly clean when it went in, and also the way the water moved was quite gentle inside the passages and chambers. So outside, yes, there's some erosion, but inside, where most of the stone is also granite, a lot of the stone in the passages, there doesn't seem to be much erosion.
Which that erosion on the south side would also seem to indicate that it had probably been there pretty close to the same time span as the Sphinx had.
Absolutely. Most people that try to understand the Great Pyramid in terms of its technology acknowledge that ancient Egypt was unable to build the Great Pyramid. So they put the construction of the Great Pyramid further back in time to probably before the last catastrophe, if you will, and to a very ancient civilization that has some high examples.
Yeah, but when I was reading your biography there, I noticed that this was worded in such a way as you seem to be pretty definite that your theories and your research has led you to the correct conclusion. So I take it you're pretty strongly convinced.
Well, certainly, just like everybody is about everybody's ideas. Egyptologists are very strongly convinced about their ideas, and everybody else is. So certainly, strong conviction with quite a bit of justification.
And that's what I think we're going to fix to get into here for a second. Now, your site is called thepump.org. So, and I believe when I've talked to you before, it's called the pump because you believe that they had a water pump device that they were using to lift these massive stones up higher and higher as they went.
That is correct. We believe that the Great Pyramid was built not as a tomb, but to be infrastructure for the civilization that built it. And that infrastructure served the purpose of being a machine. And that machine, the Great Pyramid in its totality, was a water pump.
Okay. Now, is this water pump the only purpose you think the pyramid was acting as, or do you think it served, like, say, multiple purposes?
I believe that the machine itself was its only purpose was to pump water. The uses for the pumped water was certainly varied. Just like a radial arm saw, its only purpose is to turn a blade, but you can make a lot of things with a radial arm saw. So the odd passages and chambers, the multiple chambers, and odd configuration wasn't for to house a tomb for some dead corpse or a pharaoh or whatever, but all of those passages and chambers served at one time to be a machine, which was to pump water.
Well, we know certainly that even today there's water standing at the lower levels of the pyramid. as I've been given to understand from some of the articles that I've read, certainly in the underground-like levels underneath the pyramid, there's water standing, which would certainly seem to support what you're saying. What is your exact theory on how they used water to build it, however?
Okay. The way the Great Pyramid was assembled is described in detail in my book, Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid. And imagine that there's no pyramid and that they want to build one. So they put on the casing stones, which are the very precise stones on the outside. They put just the first level of casing stones and set those in place. And those are cemented together. The ones that still are at the Giza Plateau are still cemented together and watertight. Well, that created a square area that was filled with water. And our research indicates that there were water locks, like the Erie Canal or the Panama Canal. These water locks came from the Nile River all the way up to the building site. And stones on barges were brought up those water locks and, in fact, into that pond created by those casing stones and removed from the barges actually into the pond. And when that pond was filled with stones, then the first level of the Great Pyramid was completed. And then they continued that process, added the second layer of casing stones, which more water was brought in and filled that pond, and then another water lock was created so that stones on barges could go from the Nile all the way up to that second pond, and they would fill that pond in with the interior stones. And that's the systematic procedure that was used to move the massive amounts of heavy stones and set them in place.
Whoa. Now, see, that sounds very methodical to me. But one of the questions that came up in the chat room while you were describing this was Paul was asking if the main pyramid was for a water pump, what about the other two nearby pyramids?
Okay. Based on our research, I don't believe that either of the other large pyramids on the Giza Plateau were water pumps. So I believe that just the Great Pyramid was a water pump. I see originally that the Giza Plateau was more of a industrial park or a science center than a necropolis, a place for tombs. Originally, that's what I believe it was for. So no, the other pyramids are built differently and do not serve the purpose of pumping water.
Yeah. Now, it's been pretty well debunked, I think, over time, and it's pretty well known fact that they're not. They were never meant to be tombs. In fact, they've never even found a body in any of them. And the claim about the kings being buried there, it's pretty common knowledge that the kings are all buried over in the. I want to say it's called the King's Valley, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Valley of the Kings, yes.
Yeah, Valley of the Kings. So, why would you want to bury so many kings over here and then only, none over here and then say the place is for a tomb? Kind of defies all logic. So, what you're describing to me sounds like a much more practical, useful purpose, which could probably be reinstituted to this day. But one of the questions I think would come up with that is, how did they get around the situation when the Nile River was down and water was not as plentiful?
Okay, the source water for the Giza Plateau was not directly from the Nile River. It was from, there's scholarly debate, certainly, but more than likely it was from the ancient Lake Maurice, which is on the same side of the river as the Great Pyramid. That ancient lake is still there. It's much smaller now than in distant antiquity. And Herodotus, the 5th century BC historian, talked about canals from Lake Maurice to the Giza Plateau. He talked about the Great Pyramid being surrounded by water, and the Great Pyramid was like a lake. There was a wall around the Great Pyramid that existed up until the mid-1800s, and Egyptologists said that wall was to keep the unwashed masses away from the Great Pyramid. but we feel that there was a lake, that wall impounded water, and the Great Pyramid sat in that pond, if you will. And also inside the Great Pyramid, the early Egyptologist Flanders Petrie, in his early work, found what he called Nile earth inside the Great Pyramid, which was sediment, if you will. So there's a lot of evidence indicating water on the Giza Plateau, especially in distant antiquity. So that would be the source of water.
Wow. Now, I know that I think it was Robert Schock and John Gray has also been out to the plateau, and they discovered about the water erosion around the Sphinx. But I think that they were saying at the time that the Sphinx was built, they theorized it was a much more tropical time. Mm-hmm. Are you thinking that the pyramid could have possibly been built during this time?
When the Great Pyramid was built is certainly up to scholarly debate more and more. The civilization that we call the ancient Egyptians don't seem to have the technology to build even the components of the Great Pyramid. The precision of the stone cutting is phenomenal. In fact, it has never been demonstrated that the people that know about ancient Egypt, Egyptologists, they've never made a casing stone. Never drug a heavy stone around the corner of a spiral lamp.